I had seen the nanny twice. She was a woman, seemingly in her 30s, long brownish dress that looked to me to be something from the late 1800s to the turn of the century, with her hair in a bun. The first time, I was probably 10 or 11. I woke up and noticed movement by the door. I rolled over and at first, I even thought it was Mom, until I woke up enough to notice the dress. I don't believe I ever saw my mom in a dress, even in pictures. I sat up, pretty startled, and frankly, ready to make a dash for the far door if I needed to. She milled about the door for a few seconds, which seemed to last forever. Then she just kind of stepped through it and was gone. Okay, and the reason I flared this one animal sensitivity is because of my dog. I was in my early 20s, one of the last few years I was in the house. My dog and I were alone in the house for the afternoon. Sitting in the living room, which opened in a big archway into the foyer, you could easily see through the arch to the front door and the stairs. My dog suddenly jumped up and stalked. You'll know when you see a dog stalk, into the foyer. Watching the stairs the entire time, she started growling, deep and scared. Her hackles raised, running clear down her back to her rump. She backed up, never taking her eyes from the stairs. There wasn't much sound, an odd shuffling noise. But there were plenty of times over the years with plainly clear footsteps on the stairs. This strange shuffle was low and had no cadence to it. By this time, I was standing at the arch, looking into the foyer and at the stairs. A little part of me thought of grabbing my phone and snapping random pictures. But I'll be honest, what with the strange shuffle and the fact the nanny got less and less active as us kids grew up to the point where I wasn't even sure she was still active, and remembering the basement incident, more on that later, I chickened out. I decided I didn't want to know what was coming down the stairs. My dog ended up behind my legs, growing in the foyer. I eventually got her calmed down and went back to the couch. And well, life went on. So the second time I saw my nanny, I was around 13. Sitting on the couch watching TV. I can't say why, maybe a brief movement in the peripherals. But I turned and looked through the door to the dining room, and quite simply, she was just standing there. She was in front of the mantel, seemingly looking at the mirror we had hanging above. I just kind of froze and watched her. I'm sure it didn't last long, but it felt like several minutes. She eventually turned away from me, back towards the center of the room. And as she stepped away, that was just kind of it. She was gone. I flared this doppelganger because of this weirdness. I really don't have any idea about this experience. It was super odd and strange. But I was probably in my last year or two of high school. I was in my room playing games when my mom popped her head in and was like, "Oh, this is where you ran off to. Did I bore you that much?" To which I intelligently replied, "Huh?" Long story short, my mom insisted I spent the last solid 20 minutes sitting at the kitchen table talking to her as she cooked dinner. Not even about anything unusual or scary, just regular everyday conversation. When she turned around and I was just gone, she swears to this day I was in the kitchen with her, and I know I had been in my room the whole time. Just to warn you guys, I know some of you are going to find this experience anticlimactic, but all I can say is that from my standpoint, this was a very powerful and scary experience. I was 16 or so, and had gone to the basement for some reason, which honestly I can't even remember now. But as I was down there, I heard movement behind me and a raspy breath sound. Before I could even turn around, there was thunderous booming. The entire basement seemed to shake. I honestly thought the house was coming down on my head. Crashing and banging and booming, it truly was deafening. The feeling I'll never be able to get across. I could feel this this whatever all around me. I have no shame. I turned and ran as fast as I could. I dashed up the stairs and out the door to the back patio. I hung onto the knob, not daring to let it go. I stood staring, my eyes not leaving the door, waiting for something to pull the curtain back and peer at me through the glass. I'm sure it was seconds, but it felt like forever. My knuckles white on the knob. Nothing happened. I fished the keys out one-handed and locked the door, only then letting go and stepping back and looking at the house, wondering if the roof caved or a drunk driver crashed into the house. I walked around the house and back in, shaken. And this is where it gets kind of good. My dad was immediately like, "What did you do?" And it turns out my dad and mom and sister all heard the banging, but from their side, they said it sounded like it was coming from the basement. From my side, it sounded like it was coming from above me. At this time, my dad was still insisting we were all crazy and there was nothing in the house. He would eventually admit that he had seen, felt, and heard things in the house as well. This incident was in fact the turning point, so he said it was nothing. I had scared myself and knocked over a workbench or something, and that I had to go down and clean it up. I flatly refused. My dad grumbled, but went down to clean up my mess. He was gone several minutes. I told my mom and sister about what happened in the basement. When he returned, we all looked at him expectantly. I said, "So what fell?" He looked pretty sheepish and muttered, "Nothing. Everything was just where it was supposed to be." All that horrible noise we all heard, and nothing was out of place. It was a while before I went back to the basement. The experience honestly scared me. Okay, so this really is the last thing from the old house. Though I've had a few strange things happen in the new place, it's nothing like the old house in frequency or intensity. I flared this because, frankly, I didn't know what else it could be. This is one of the odd things in the house, like the doppelganger, that I never understood. It just kind of seemed to happen. It was like the last year and a half I lived the house. Now, nothing had really changed. Didn't even start packing boxes and shuffling furniture until the last couple months I was there. It started small. I would see strange movements in the shadows. Small and quick enough, I pretty much convinced myself it was all in my head. But eventually, the shadows seemed to form, I don't know, almost like little forms, separate from the surrounding darkness and shadows. They were small and not very much like people. By the time I moved out, they had grown to be about 3 feet. The form honestly looked like a little kid wearing a sheet as a ghost costume. Just a rounded top on a cylindrical body. My dog would react to them too. They seemed concentrated in the second master bedroom, which I had converted into a library. They were quick and darted about my bookcases. I never saw more than 2 move at the same time, but by the end, I usually saw at least 1 every day. I just kind of silently made a deal in my head I would leave them alone, as long as they didn't try to hurt my dog. Super weird, but honestly, nothing much else happened with them. I will say, just for full disclosure, I was getting pretty nasty headaches at the time, as well as dreams I prefer not to talk about. But I can't honestly say I know it was all connected. And I admit, even I take such experiences as people talking about dreams with a large grain of salt. The human brain is a weird and scary thing sometimes. But as I said, just to answer any potential questions about the strange little darting shadows, those were things that were happening to me at the time as well. I, female 20 at the time, have had no history of mental illnesses, other than depression and anxiety when I was in my teens. I don't much dabble in the occult anymore, though I did when I was super little. I don't know if this means anything to anyone, but I'm an American with 3rd-generation Sicilian blood. I won't give my last name, but it literally translates to fish. My family have been a part of Sicily for so long, I believe there's a town that's named after us. We've been fishermen since the Romans, I think. And even after we moved to America, we kept fishing until my dad was born. I don't super believe in past lives or ancestral help, so I've never assumed my fascination with the ocean was much more than just liking the water. I only bring this up because I've got a medium friend who thinks it could be related. I don't know. I grew up in California and absolutely loved the ocean. I wanted to be as close to it as I could. My grandfather passed away, and so I didn't grow up fishing at all, but I was weirdly comforted by it. Anyways, one day I got to go with my mom on a business trip to Monaco. It was my first time leaving America, and I didn't realize, but it was going to be my first time in the Mediterranean Sea. I remember the night that we arrived, there was a huge company party at the hotel we were staying at, but I couldn't focus on what was going on. I needed to go. I was feeling super weird, not like anxious, but like there was something I was forgetting. I told my mom I'd be right back and went to the front of the hotel. I wasn't totally sure what I was doing, but I felt like I had to go. As soon as I got away from the hotel, I looked up and saw the reddest, largest harvest moon I had ever seen. It felt like a shock run through me. Like I wasn't supposed to be seeing it, but I couldn't look away. And then just like that, I felt pulled to the ocean. I took off my shoes and walked into the beach. If you don't know, Monaco doesn't have naturally sandy beaches. They're all incredibly rocky. But it was like I could feel the pain of the rocks, but I had to keep moving toward the ocean. There was a man there, and I remember him saying something to me, but I can't remember what it was. It was too dark to make out what he looked like. I walked past him and kept going till he reached the ocean, and the water was up to my knees. I kept looking up at the red moon. I don't know how long I was there for, but I remember feeling the whole time while I was there. I remember not wanting to leave, like I was supposed to be here, and any time I wasn't would be wasted. It was like a weird inner euphoria. When I did eventually pull away, it was like I was snapped back into reality. My feet hurt from the rocks. I wanted my jacket. I remember thinking, what the fuck are you doing out here, barefoot in an ocean you don't know in the middle of the night? And I ran back. Nothing like that has ever happened again. Have you been through anything like that? It felt like a trance. So I won't go into too much background, but I was heavily addicted to drugs basically from 14 until December of 2019. I've had some slips, but I've been solidly clean for 5 months now. It's been a journey. There were so many reasons for my addiction, but one thing I could never deal with was my sexual trauma. I mention this because I feel like this made my spirit susceptible to letting this incubus into my dreams. It started in 2015. I'd get these horrible nightmares, always pretty much the same thing, but they always felt so fucking real. I was always running from what I knew had to be a male demon. He had wings and claws and literally looked like a demon out of those old 1700s religious paintings. It was just the most evil looking thing I'd ever seen in my life. What was even scarier was the fear I felt in these dreams. I've never ever felt this scared in my life ever. It was the worst feeling, and honestly, it's hard to even put into words just how terrifying this thing made me feel. Every time I was running, I knew I was running for my fucking life. And I also knew he wanted to rape me if he caught me. The worst times, he would catch me and rape me, his fingers grabbing and scratching and hurting me. I remember waking up not knowing where I was or who I was, just screaming and hyperventilating until I fell back asleep. When I had a boyfriend, I would wake him up because I'd either be hyperventilating or crying in my sleep, and he'd know to wake me up. Sometimes my hyperventilating would be so bad, it would wake me up out of my dream on my own. Even when I started getting clean, the dreams were still so bad that they would make me relapse, or I would take pills to make them go away. I always thought they were just nightmares from my trauma, but I've just never had such vivid dreams like I did when I had that specific dream. And also, I read up on incubuses, and everything written about them is what I experienced. I wanted to see if anyone else has any experience with their own incubus or succubus. My grandmother died of cancer earlier this year in May. I lived with her for most of my life and was her live-in caretaker up until her death. I had a memorable moment with her while she was still lucid and said everything that I wanted to, so I have no regrets about her death. It's important to know that both my grandmother and grandfather both died in this house, 10 years apart. I'm now in the process of buying a house. However, not much has been changed on the inside. The process has been fraught with greed on the part of my mother and one aunt who are two of the three owners of the house. My mother has never been a mom to me, hence why I lived with my grandmother. I woke up this morning and looked at the wall of family photos in the living room and noticed one was missing. Half asleep still, it wasn't immediately apparent what one it was. I went over to look and found the photo of my mom holding me as a toddler behind my grandmother's chair, which was under it. Nobody has been in the house but I, and I have no animals. The photo was secured on a hook that was still intact. You must lift the frame straight up about a 1/4 inch to remove it from the wall, so simply banging on the wall or slamming a door wouldn't affect it. I cannot find a logical explanation for how the photo got off the wall, no matter how hard I try. I feel like the photo was something my grandmother did, but what could it mean? Of the 12 photos of various family members, some of the same person or couple, that was the only one that was disturbed. So I'm 20 now. This story is from when I was very little, so I don't remember everything about it. My mother was pregnant with my sister. The doctor had told my mother on one of her scans it seemed as though they were twins. However, one didn't develop properly, and therefore my sister absorbed the other. Anyway, the doctor had broken the news to my mother, and it was highly likely that she would lose my sister, or herself would die. Neither happened. Fast forward 8 or so months, my sister is born. Upon bringing her home, little me was shown my sister. I looked at my mother and asked, "Where's the other baby?" And my mother replied, "What other baby? This is the only one." I specifically said, "No, there's another baby." My mother and father were shocked. Nobody had told me about the difficulties in my mother's pregnancy, let alone there was supposed to be a twin. To make things even weirder, my mother was on birth control a few years later. She was told she was pregnant unexpectedly, to which she attempted to terminate. It was unsuccessful, and now I have another sibling. It's not as interesting as others, but I have no memory of it and constantly wonder how I knew. There was a time period in my life, maybe 1 to 2 years, when I was a kid, about 3 or 6 years old, when I would sometimes see these totally pale white/albino, lifeless, blank-faced people-like figures, covered in blots of blood, walking around in the sidewalks outside my home. They were expressionless and always looked directly in front of them where they were walking, never facing anyone, but somehow I knew that if I did get one to face me, I'd be in big trouble. They disturbed the hell out of me, but I never brought any attention to them, never told anyone about them. Important thing to note is that these humanoid figures always captured my immediate attention. They would pull me out of my non-attentive daydreaming self, while no one else noticed them, which is why I remember seeing these occurrences to this day. I even remember having a slighting of these two figures, as stupid as it sounds, once holding hands, walking, expressionless, all stiff and robotic, as they usually did. When my mom and I were walking the streets of Mexico at night back to her family's house, which was away from my home in the US, she never noticed them. So what do you guys think all that was? Just my kid's self having dreams, mistaking them for real life occurrences? Or was I actually seeing some shit? Just to clarify, I only saw them maybe about 3 or 4 times, within a time span of a year or two, with the sights occurring at night time around the streets of my house, once in Mexico at night and once in broad daylight, again around my house. I work in IT, and so I'm constantly being pressed into action by friends and family to sort out literally any technology-related issues. About 10 years ago, I was visiting my parents and they mentioned that a friend of theirs was seriously ill. He had developed motor neuron disease, and over the course of a few months, he had become bedridden and unable to function. My mother mentioned that their friends relied heavily on their computer to communicate with people, sort out appointments and medication, and order groceries as they obviously couldn't leave the house. The computer had developed some problem, and would I mind having a look at it? My dad and I went over to see them, and the man's condition was as described to me. He was in a bed in an alcove in the living room, in front of the TV. He had trouble speaking, though he could make himself understood. It just took him a bit longer. I basically decided to reinstall the OS on their PC, and did so while my dad chatted to him and his wife about everything and nothing. I finished the IT task, but I needed a password to make sure they could get into their email. The lady didn't know it, but the man was eventually able to communicate to me, and it worked. They were very grateful. As we were about to leave, we were stood at the side of the bed, level with the man's head. He struggled to say something. We listened closely and eventually worked out what he was saying. Who was at the end of the bed? The man in black. His wife assured him there was only us there. I was thoroughly creeped out, but we just said our goodbyes and left about 6 p.m. and went back to my parents' house. Later that night, around 10:30 p.m, the phone rang, and when my mother answered it, I knew it instantly what it was. Just a gut feeling. It was the wife ringing my mother to say the man had died within the last hour. This is the weirdest story of my whole life. I haven't told anyone about it except a friend who laughed at me. This is all real, and I'm not lying. My brother works for my parents. He went home with his truck at noon to eat with us. He's 10 years older than me, and we weren't on good terms when the story happened. I was 19 years old at the time. So it was June, and my parents weren't here for the whole day. I was supposed to cook pasta for my brother and his girlfriend when they would be home. You need to understand that the truck makes a lot of noise and that my dogs are super sensitive to the sound of any car in our alley. We have a portal, so only us can go here. It was 11 a.m. and my dogs began to bark. I hear the sounds of the trucks, and I swear to God, I have seen this black truck parking in the alley. So I let the dogs go outside, and they go near my brother, playing with him. The dogs hate being outside alone. Like they bark and scream like babies in front of our doors if there isn't anyone out there with them. But this day, the dogs stayed quiet. They were with my brother, after all, nothing abnormal. I kept watching the TV, thinking that my brother could cook himself since he was home earlier. I know he needed to take his girlfriend from her school, but it was only around noon, and it was like 20 past 11, so there was plenty of time. I keep watching TV until I hear the trucks again and the doors open. It was my brother with his girlfriend. He was super mad at me because the cooking wasn't ready. I told him he could have done it because he was home so early instead of doing nothing. He looked at me like I was crazy and told me he wasn't home at all. He'd just arrived. He had a busy morning and was almost late to be at school for his girlfriend on time. After that, we had one of our worst ever arguments. I still don't know what happened. I saw his trucks. The dogs saw it too. The dogs wouldn't have stayed with anyone else outside that long anyway. He has no interest in lying about this at all. My first place I lived alone, and with my 2 kids at the time, came with some very strange, unexplainable experiences. To start, I found this mediocre, small, worn down trailer for less than $500 a month, and as a single mom at the time, I jumped on it. The landlord told me to leave the mirrors up though. No biggie, I didn't think much of it. I'm not much of a believer in the paranormal, so I just assumed she liked the decor a certain way. The mirrors were in places I couldn't even reach. One was in the living room / kitchen area, and one was basically bolted to the wall. I couldn't move it if I wanted to. It looked out of place, but I didn't think anything of it. The other was in the hallway, and even on my tiptoes, I could only see the top of my hair. I'm a solid 5 foot. So like I said, I didn't think it was a big deal. But as time went by, things got so weird, to the point that I just cannot come up with any explanation to what was going on. I began hearing footsteps, as if a child was running down the hallway by my bedroom door every night, sometimes multiple times a night, yet my kids were fast asleep. I wasn't in close proximity to any neighbours. I thought, maybe an animal? But the timing was just so consistent and the steps were always exactly the same. Even friends would point it out when they would come over. But I just got so tired of worrying, I just ignored it. Told them it was just a ghost and laughed it off. Well, that's when I started having the worst fucking nightmares of my life. My sleep paralysis started again. I had a nightmare where I stared at myself in a mirror and said, I don't believe in the devil. I'm an atheist. And watched my face morph into some demonic contortion. Scared the actual hell out of me. Some other weird things happened, but those were the most memorable for me. So I found out that I had a friend who rented a house not far from me, from the same landlord who also told her to keep her mirrors up, and had something very similar happen. But she had an older daughter who began saying that she saw a girl in their house. Things got really bad for them, and she eventually had a priest come and bless her house. She took her mirrors down after the priest, and apparently things got better. I don't personally believe in the whole priest blessing my house thing. As I've said, I'm not religious at all. And before this experience, I've never believed in anything paranormal. I've always been able to explain things away, but this whole experience was really weird. And I think the mirrors had something to do with it. But what?